I'm Tom Pelissero. I authored a book called Bring One Home. It's about growing up in Bessemer, Michigan in the 1960s. And the backstory is it's an iron ore mining town, a mining economy. And I write about the effect of losing the mines in the community and how it affected not only the people who had jobs in the mines, but also the high school, the basketball team, and other effects such as how businesses were able to survive without that type of income.
You're listening to If These Woods Could Talk, produced by the Rhinelander District Library. If these woods could talk, they might ride the pine and keep on cheering. We're extending our range a bit for today's storyteller. We spoke with Thomas L. Pelissero of Bessemer, Michigan, author of the new book, Bring One Home, a memoir of boyhood, basketball, and hometown spirit. The book juxtaposes the decline of Bessemer's mining industry in the 1960s with their high school basketball team's years-long losing streak. It's a compelling concept, and the book is filled with far more stories from Bessemer's heyday than could reasonably fit in an episode. So I guess you'll have to check out the book. The book's release party will be Saturday, November 1st at the Bessemer City Hall auditorium.
So I grew up in Bessemer, Michigan, as I mentioned. Matter of fact, I was born above the Bessemer Food Shop on Cellar Street in Bessemer, and we lived there for 6 months. And my parents bought a house that was 3 blocks up on Cellar Street, and we lived there the rest of our lives. I left at 18, but my parents stayed there till they passed away. Bessemer is a small town in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It had about 2,000 residents when I lived there. It's about 1,500 the people that live there. But in its heyday, probably about 5,000 were there in the heyday of the mining industry in the 20s and 30s. And then slowly over time, as mining expanded, some of the people moved out. And I would say in the early 60s, where this begins, probably around 2,500 people in the community.
Sure. Well, let's get to the book. So we open with a prologue.
Yeah, so I'm about to write a book about a team that couldn't win a game for 3 years. So do I open when they finally break the losing streak, or do I open with when Bessemer was winning basketball games? And in 1947, there was a team my father was on, and they won the first Upper Peninsula Class B basketball championship in the history of the school. And when they came home on the bus, there was a celebration in town, right? You know, people lining the streets in March, standing on snowbanks, and then going off to the high school where speeches were made by anybody who was anybody in town. It was really a big moment. And the one thing that I remember about that team is the fact that they were all friends. Is when I was a kid, these same guys, they were all together. They were on softball teams. They were on whatever. They just stuck together. But it was a moment in which the community of Bessemer was at the top of the mountain, right? We got there. We won it all. And they were actually a little mad because Alma in Lower Michigan claimed to be state champs in Class B. But in 47, the Upper Peninsula didn't go down to the Lower Peninsula to play in the state tournament. So Alma claimed to be state champs, but as I pointed out in the prologue, the coach says, they never played us. So this was the only team in the history of A.D. Johnson High School that won their last game in basketball and were champs, and there was no other place to go, right? So when you look up in the Michigan High School League record books, they list all the state champions from every year in every class. In 1947, they list 2 teams. But Bessemer has never been stated as a co-champion or a state champion. And that's something that I'll work on in my spare time. But it may be something that needs to be recognized in the future. But my dad told me stories about that 47 team. And then I got the opportunity to interview during this process of writing the book his best friend, who was Paul Posiga. Paul lived to be 90. My dad only lived to be 60. And so I lost all those years and all those stories from my dad. But Paul filled me in on those. And just how great it was for those guys to bring a championship back to town. So that's the prologue. That's where it starts, right? Then suddenly the new coach from 1963 is driving into town and comes over the crest of the hill and sees Bessemer down below, and he just thinks this is going to be the greatest opportunity he's ever had in his life. And he goes on one of the longest losing streaks in the history of the Upper Peninsula. When they broke the streak eventually, it was the longest in the UP in 1966. And it was the 3rd longest in the state of Michigan. Only White Pigeon, who lost 61 straight, and Three Rivers, who lost 54 straight in the state, but lower Michigan, had longer losing streaks. But I thought that was a great spot to say, were we ever any good? And that was a good spot to start. And eventually throughout the book, I'm prodding my dad to tell me about the other teams. I'm actually sharing stories told to me during the research where people said, we used to have a great team in 53. We had the best team in 57. And then we get into these years. So you can't necessarily write a book on which all you do is lose, right? There's more to it there. And so I wanted to intersperse throughout the book. We won here, we won there, we were good here, we were not so good here. But to keep the reader interested in engaging with the team itself, and are we going to win tonight? Is this the game? Because that's how we felt as children watching these guys play.
And the thing I wanted to bring up, some interesting kind of local flavor from the UP in our with the coach who is Finnish.
Yes, Helgi Pokima. Helgi was a great athlete, played for the University of Minnesota, played with Bruce Smith, who was a Heisman Trophy winner at the University of Minnesota. But his Finnish was better than his English, according to my dad and also Posiga. Paul said that Windy Kangas, who was on the team, was the all-time scorer in Bessemer at that time. He spoke Finnish, and so he would interpret for the team when Helgi was getting mad or telling them instruction. Nobody understood what he was saying. And Paul said at one point, Helgi and Windy got into an argument in Finnish. And they were just yelling at each other. And Windy, their best scorer, the best player, he walked off and went into the locker room. And Helgi went after him. They went, well, what do we do? If he quits, what kind of team do we have? And they came back out laughing and talking and so on. It all worked out. But the whole argument, they didn't understand what it was even about. But it was all in Finnish. But he knew little about basketball. He was a football coach. If you came to Bessemer, you came to coach football, but you had to take on the basketball job too. And that's what Helgi did. And what the people I interviewed, like Doc, he said he didn't really know. He let our talent just take over. He didn't get in the way, but he knew how to, when somebody needed to go into the game, give him a rest, or his shot just wasn't working. He knew those things. But in general, he just let the guys go. And somehow the game he knew least about They took them all the way to the top. And not only did they win in 47, they won again in 48, the UP championship, except that year they did go downstate, and they won their quarterfinal and got to the semifinals and lost to the eventual state champ. These guys were really, really good. And again, I love those stories. I love to hear about these kids that really grew up during World War II, and they had nothing. They had nothing. Doc talked about going out to a barn where they would go up in the hayloft and hook up some sort of rim and then just shoot and play. They had nothing. And yet these guys pulled it all together and won what at the time was all they could win. They won it all. So
It sounds like Hoosiers, like the kid in his yard.
It does in a lot of ways, and but one of the reviews I had on the book, it's the wonder years in Hoosier coming together because
Sure.
of telling stories about growing up in the town and what we did and or what they may have done back in the day.
So I told you when we first talked about this, but I think it's such a cool concept for the book to kind of juxtapose. Whenever you put a social trend alongside a political or economic trend, and that's kind of what you did here.
Mm-hmm.
So, you able to talk a little bit about the ore mines?
Yeah, so people probably don't realize that the iron ore, the hematite, was discovered in Bessemer. The Colby mine is the discovery for the Golgibic Iron Range. That's the spot. It's just in this little community of Yale, which is part of Bessemer. And that was 1884. They didn't even have a train that came in those days. The train tracks were, I should say, the surveying for the train tracks was being done. But we don't think the trains came till 87, so we have no idea how they got the ore out of that mine and onto a ship and taken somewhere. But those people were ingenious, and they used horses, quite well to pull things. But so that's 1884. Well, by 1966, the last mine is closing. So it's an 82-year run, 82-year economy in which it booms. And I would say in the early 50s, it started to go downhill. The Peterson mine was started in 1955. They dug down nearly 4,000 feet. And that was the last mine that was started and the last mine to close. But they closed the Cary mine in Hurley, or Guile. They closed the Geneva mine that was Ironwood Bessemer. People always say it was in Bessemer, and some say it was in Ironwood. But and then that left the Peterson. Well, so how did it affect Bessemer, right? People chased the mining jobs. So if you're closing the mines in Bessemer or Ironwood or Guile, you're going to Minnesota. You're going to Lower Michigan. You're going to other places. You're taking your whole family with you. You may even have taken a business with you. A friend of mine that's coming up for the book release said, we left in 65. Her father was a dentist. He wasn't a miner. He took his family of 6, and they left town. One of the best basketball players we ever would have had in Bessemer was her older brother, but he left too. So the effect was that people didn't have the same money that they had before. The businesses were just trying to, stay open. And the basketball team was affected significantly because they had to start to cut back on the expenses to run the school. Could I read a little bit here? So the Board of Education meets. This is in 1962. They already see what's happening. Our revenue's been declining since 59. This is Carlo Heikkinen, who was the superintendent at that time. It's no longer sustainable. So the Board of Education stared at their copy of the financial statement and began the task of approving, reducing, and eliminating requests. Tennis and skiing were the first programs to be eliminated. Transportation for the summer recreational program gone. Honors banquet dropped. Grade school basketball revival dead on arrival. The football team, they get new uniforms, but the requests for new band uniforms are declined. And it sort of goes on and on like that. And in the end, the new superintendent who is at this same meeting, he says, I'm sorry to say we need to tighten our belts. We need to lock everything down, the spending, the programs, the buildings. And the board approved the changes. We're kids. We're playing on snow-covered driveways to play basketball. We're freezing. You can only dribble a ball outside so long before it turns into a rock, or the net itself is frozen, so you need a stick to get the ball once it lands in the net. All we want to do is get in the gymnasium, and they're locked. And they won't even turn the lights on if we did get in there. So it affects the ability in sports, and in this case, the basketball team, to teach the fundamentals to kids. We're all learning it outside, where the rules are the snowbanks in or are they out of bounds, we're shooting 10 feet up, which is the normal height for a basket, but it's a slanted driveway, so sometimes it's 15 feet to the basket. So you're all mixed up, but we don't know what a layup is. We don't know what a free throw is. We're just shooting the ball up there and making up our own rules, which I think in life was great as kids, in that we had to take responsibility, create our own rules, and organize our friends into this is what the game is, and this is how we select teams, and so on. And we're 8, 9 years old. So it was a good learning lesson for later in life. But when I set out on this, we talked about 1947, and the streak, this is your spoiler alert, the streak ends in January of 1966. When the streak ended, in the next day's newspaper, the Ironwood Daily Globe, was a picture of the net being cut down. Celebratory moment. We didn't win a championship. We had just broken a 42-game losing streak over 4 different seasons, 3 different coaches, 30 different players. And I cut that clipping out, that picture out, and I started a scrapbook. And this was the first picture I put in there in 1966. And then over the years, I added to it my glory moments when I played on teams, whether it be Little League baseball or basketball. But that whole book is full of that. But that was the first picture. So when I retired in 2017, you're gathering up all your items. The scrapbook shows up again, and I look at that picture, and I think, wow, that was really a great night. And then I scratch my head, and I said, I knew those guys. Those guys were good athletes. Why did they lose? How could you lose that many games in a row? So that was the start of me making phone calls to say, do I have a book here? Do I have something that works? And I got all these different reasons for why that team couldn't win, and one of them was the iron ore. Mining was closing, and good players were leaving town. Another one was there was no intramural basketball program for grade school kids so that we could learn fundamentals. And, on and on with why they thought the team was losing. So is that a whole book? And then I remembered telling my kids, when you're young, your parents read you books at night, and after a while you run out of the storybooks. So they said, Dad, don't read that book again, right? Mm-hmm. And tell us something different. So I started telling them Bessemer stories of me as a kid. And they'd say, tell us the one about when you climbed the bluff and saw the Christmas tree up on the bluff. So I would tell them that story. Tell me about going out and you were hunting with a BB gun, and what was that like? And did you go by yourself, and did you run into a bear or whatever? And so I would tell them story after story, and one night when I reached for a book, they said, no, we want Bessemer stories. And I went, okay, what if I took all these Bessemer stories and did the research on the basketball team, that losing streak, and combined them? Is that a book? And, well, that's what was the genesis of Bring One Home, a memoir of boyhood, basketball, and hometown spirit. That's how it came together. I wrote this one section in the back of the book, I should say in the back of the book, one of the last chapters, chapter 63, that kind of captures the grit of our community at the same time they're facing another loss. It was 7 a.m. on a January morning when 50 miners on the 28th level of the Peterson mine in Bessemer put down their tools and were hoisted to the surface for the very last time. The iron ore mining era had ended near where it began. Iron ore production began in the Gogebic Range in 1884 at the Colby Mine, just up the road from the Peterson mine. 5 million tons of ore was mined at Peterson when it opened in 1953 to its quiet ending in 1966. The mining equipment would be removed and sold off in pieces to other mines across the United States and foreign countries. Apparently there was great demand for the equipment, but none for our iron ore. Over 170 workers lost their jobs with the closing of the Peterson mine. It came as no surprise. There have been layoffs, furloughs, strikes, and now the final nail in the coffin, closure of the last operating mine in the area. Chalk up another loss for Bessemer. The miners would take it in stride, hold their heads high, and never look back. That's how you survive, fighting for another day. The correlation between losing jobs and losing games in a community that was looking for success, right? Finally a victory, just keeps building towards them breaking the streak and what that meant to the community. But once those jobs left, they never, ever came back. Now think about that. 170 workers. At the time, that's about 10% of the residency in the community.
All right. One last time, do you want to tell us about the book and the event?
Yes. The book is called Bring One Home. And by the way, Bring One Home is something my father used to say to us. When he sent us to the game, any game, he'd always say the same thing. Hey, bring one home, meaning bring home the victory. And I thought, wow, that's a great title. It's called Bring One Home, a memoir of boyhood, basketball, and hometown spirit by Thomas L. Pelissero. The event is Saturday, November 1st. It'll be at the Bessemer City Hall auditorium. And the book sells for $20, but I'm giving the entire $20 of every book sale to the public library. I got my first books there, my first library card, Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss. And I used to go there and read biographies, even when I was 8, 9 years old. Newt Rockney, Andrew Jackson, anything that looked the same, had the same size font in the book, but they were all knitted together and falling apart. And I just loved them. They had no picture on the cover or anything, so my imagination could run wild as to what Newt Rockney looked like or Lou Gehrig looked like. And I do think that had a great influence on me one day writing this memoir to tell a little bit of history of our community. And I hope people like it. My friends and others are traveling hundreds of miles to come to this event. I thought, wow, the promise of this book is really happening. We're bringing one home.
Hey, thanks for listening to If These Woods Could Talk, produced by the Rhinelander District Library. Thanks to Tom Pelissero for coming down from the UP to tell about his book and some of the history of Bessemer. And once again, The book is Bring One Home, a memoir of boyhood, basketball, and hometown spirit, and it will have a release party Saturday, November 1st at the Bessemer City Hall auditorium.